Welcome back. I want to talk about goaltending. I want to talk about goaltending because anytime you get into a debate over who the best goaltenders are, and I saw this debate on social media, and I thought, I'll go ahead and throw in a video with my own take on it. From year to year, it changes. From year to year, who the best goalie in the league is changes, and it has to drive GMs crazy. It has to drive coaches crazy, and on some level, probably fans as well. Here in Vancouver, Demko looked like he was absolutely emerging as one of the best young goaltenders in the league, gets off to a disastrous start, gets injured, and now we have no idea what kind of goaltender he is, whether or not he wants to stay, all that other fun stuff. And so, goaltending is very, very unpredictable. So I wanted to look at Vezina voting. Now, Vezina voting is done by general managers. It is not done by the media. It is not fan votes. It is done by general managers. And so you get a good idea of just how much things change from one season to another. And I just wanted to put the top 5 in voting each year, just to show how all over the place it can be. We'll go back to 2013. I figured 10 years is a good sample size. You've got Bobrovsky winning the Vezina that year, playing in Columbus. Lundqvist was second, playing with the Rangers. Niemi, third, playing with San Jose at the time. Craig Anderson in Ottawa was fourth, and Tuukka Rask is fifth in Boston. So there's Niemi as a top 3, and it might be easy for people to look back and go, wait, Niemi was a top 3 for Vezina? Yes. Niemi had some very good quality seasons. Had a rough year, ended up in Dallas. It didn't get better in Dallas for him. 2014, Tuukka Rask wins the Vezina. He's the number 1 goalie in the league. Varlamov was second out of Colorado, and then you got Bishop out of Tampa Bay, Price out of Montreal, and Quick out of LA. So, 2013 and 2014, the only name that's on both lists is Rask, who moves from 5th to 1st. The other 4 goaltenders were not on the board the year before. So 2015, how many end up on the list that weren't the year before? Well, Carey Price moves from 4 to 1. He wins that year. That's the big Carey Price year. 2015 is the magical season of Carey Price where he could do no wrong. Pekka Rinne was number 2 from Nashville. Devin Dubnyk in Minnesota's 3rd. Braden Holtby from Washington 4th. And Henrik Lundqvist from the Rangers is 5th. So again, 2015, you got Carey Price at the top. The other 4 are completely different. 2016, Holtby wins it. Out of Washington, Ben Bishop out of Tampa's number 2. Jonathan Quick's number 3. Roberto Luongo's in Florida. He's number 4. And Corey Crawford in Chicago's number 5. So Holtby moves from 4th to 1st. And the rest are all different. All changes. And this again is why when you get into the argument over who the best goalie in the NHL is, you're going to get different answers. And there's going to be those who will say, well, consistency-wise, this guy's usually the best. But, again, it is kind of all over the place. So 2017, Bobrovsky, who hasn't been on the board since 2013, wins another Vezina in 2017. Holtby's number 2, so he drops from 1 to 2. Carey Price is number 3 after a year outside the top 5. Cam Talbot for Edmonton was 4th. And Devin Dubnyk of Minnesota was 5th. So from one year to the next, again, 1. 1 out of 5 ends up carrying over from one year to the next, and that's Holtby, who goes from 1 to 2. Now, at that point, it looked like Braden Holtby was, racking up the wins so fast that there was even discussion of, hey, if he can keep going at this pace, he could end up threatening the all-time wins leader. That, of course, hasn't happened. He's right now taking an entire year off. His NHL career might be done. And it is just remarkable how quickly you can go from being a premier starting goaltender in the NHL to not being in the top 10. The interesting thing is, of course, Holtby in 2018 doesn't end up in the Vezina voting at all because he wasn't even the starting goaltender going into the playoffs. Pekka Rinne won the trophy in 2018. He was the Vezina winner. Connor Hellebuck is number 2. Andre Vasilevsky's number 3. Freddie Anderson in Toronto's number 4. And Marc-Andre Fleury in Vegas is number 5. So it's that awkward moment where you realize none of the 5 goaltenders in the 2017 Vezina voting, those top 5, none of them made the top 5 in 2018. Not one. So, again, if you have a contract year here, these guys are going to get paid because, look at this, they're right up there for Vezina, and then the year after, they're not top 5, and there would be furrowed brows looking towards a general manager who might have overpaid for a goaltender having a really, really strong year. 2019, Vasilevskiy wins the trophy. So Vasilevskiy moves from 3rd to 1st. Ben Bishop's back on the board, now playing in Dallas. He's number 2. Robin Lehner playing for the Islanders. He was number 3, and famously, the Islanders let him go. Marc-Andre Fleury for Vegas moves from 5th to 4th, and Jordan Binnington was 5th that year. So this is an unusual season where 2 of the 5 end up making it in the next year. Notice Pekka Rinne, who was number 1 in 2018, had an awesome season after the 2017 run to the Stanley Cup Final. He's not even top 5. Doesn't appear on the board again. So it is just one of those oddities when it comes to goaltenders. 2020, Connor Hellebuyck wins the trophy after not being in the top 5 the year before, and in 2018 he was number 2. So wildly different results there. Tuukka Rask was 2nd. Rask hadn't been on the board since winning it in... No, Rask has been on the board since he won it, hasn't he? Nope, not since 2014. That's just crazy to me that from 2014 to 2020, Rask doesn't show up in the top 5. Vasilevskiy moves from number 1 to number 3. So Vasilevskiy in the top 5 every year since 2018, and that's a big part of the reason why I declare him to be, I think, the best goalie in the league. 2 cup rings don't hurt. Notice that Markstrom playing in Vancouver was number 4 that year, and Merzlikins number 5 out of Columbus. So Elvis, who's had a hard time this year in Columbus, was top 5 in Vezina voting in 2020. Not that long ago. And again, Markstrom had a remarkable year, dragged the Canucks to some respectability in the 2019-2020 season, and you could argue the Canucks have paid for that since then, in that season might have made the Canucks look better than what they really were. 2021, Marc-Andre Fleury wins it for Vegas. Now, he had been top 5 in 2018 and 2019. He had never won the Vezina Trophy. 2021 also saw Vasilevskiy top 5. He was number 2 that year, so he moves from 3, 1, 3, 2. Again, I would argue the best goalie in the league. Philip Grubauer is last year in Colorado. Of course, he was 3rd. Hellebuyck, number 4, and Varlamov out of New York for the Islanders, number 5. So Hellebuyck drops from 1 to 4. Fleury's back in, Vasilevsky's there, so that's 2 out of 5 that carry over from 2020 to 2021. That's actually a pretty high number on this board. 2022, so last year, Shesterkin wins it. Is he top 5 this year? I don't know if he's top 5 this year. He should be, right? He should be by the end of the year, I would think. Markstrom's number 2. For Calgary last year, and of course right now Markstrom, he may very well be out of the starter's job in Calgary, showing just how volatile goaltending can be. Because last year you would look at Markstrom's contract and say, what a bargain Calgary got there. And this year you'd look at his contract and say, wow, what's Calgary going to do with that contract sometime soon? Saros, number 3 on the board for the Nashville Predators. Freddie Anderson, number 4 for Carolina. Vasilevskiy, number 5 for Tampa. My guess is that when we get to the end of the season, Shesterkin, Saros, and Vasilevskiy probably end up in the top 5, but it's not that easy because we'll get into the overall numbers. And it's interesting. Now, I want to talk a bit about cap hit. I want to talk about cap hit because a debate that's raged for years now is how much should you pay for goaltending? How much is goaltending actually worth to you? And I think one thing that I've learned following hockey as much as I have over the last few years is that there's a lot of good goaltending out there. And if you're smart with your budget, and I'm looking at you, Carolina, if you're smart with your budget, you can find quality goaltending and you can do it without breaking the bank. Carolina's done it for years now, and it's worked pretty darn well. And it reminds me of Chicago. Corey Crawford was a very good goaltender. He was never really a mega star in the net. Here in 2016 is the only time he's top 5 in Vezina voting. Very good goaltender who won a Stanley Cup ring. Niemi also had a Stanley Cup ring in Chicago. But would Niemi be considered a big star goaltender? Not really, although he was top 5 in Vezina voting once on this board as well. And so that question comes up. Now, Carey Price still has the highest cap hit right until 2026. He's 33 years of age, currently $10.5 million. Now, Price probably won't play again. The Carey Price lesson might be about signing long-term contracts. But again, if you don't sign Price to a long-term contract, you risk him leaving the team. So I totally understand why Montreal signed that. Florida has Bobrovsky under contract until 2026 at $10 million. He is currently 32 years of age. Now, with Bobrovsky, there's been discussions of whether or not his contract gets moved, but who takes on the $10 million cap hit from Florida? I mean, if Florida has cap problems, and they do, I don't see a GM taking on that contract to help him out. Bobrovsky, though, oddly enough, has played well, but he wouldn't be in the top 5 for Vezina voting, right? So, again, while he's playing well, is it worth that $10 million for them right now? That's the question. Now Fleury showed up on the board too, and I'm not sure why, because it showed his cap hit as $7 million. It's only $3.5 million until 2024, but he's on the board, and I figured, well, I got it all written down. But above him is Vasilevskiy, and I want to focus on Vasilevskiy a little bit. 26 years of age, $9.5 million cap hit until 2028. Tampa Bay did this right. And I know it's a broken record to say Tampa Bay did it right with a contract, but they did this one right. The $9.5 million cap hit for Vasilevskiy, I think, is fair because he plays a lot. So the backup goaltender in Tampa Bay is not going to make a lot of money. This is a league that has gone more towards the 1A, 1B. So you can make the argument of, instead of spending, say, $8 million on a starter, maybe you want to spend $8 million between your goaltending tandem, have a $5 million starter, and a $2.5 million to $3 million backup. And, just the 1A, 1B situation. I go back to Boston, for instance. Swayman plays a lot for a backup, too. And it is a 1A, 1B situation in Boston. It works pretty well. So for Vasilevskiy, he is in a situation where he has to be the starter at $9.5 million, but he's done that quite well. And with Elliott, right now, they have a backup goaltender who's played well, too, on the older side and among goaltenders. And honestly, probably looking forward to another Stanley Cup ring in Tampa Bay, if that was to happen. Then you got Gibson. Now, I want to talk about Gibson, too, because anytime you get into discussions about John Gibson, he might be the most polarizing goaltender. So there was a list of who the best goaltenders were in the league, and John Gibson got onto the top 10 list. And I'll link to the list in the description below the video, because I understand why somebody would vote for Gibson. I do. He's 27 years of age. It's a $6.4 million cap hit for Gibson until 2027. Now, has he played up to that contract this year? No. His quality starts number is at only 50%. But has he faced so many pucks? Yeah. And I think with Gibson, I think we know that the talent level is there. If Gibson was playing for the Rangers, if Gibson was playing for Boston, if Gibson was playing for Carolina, if he was playing for a team that had that defensive ability that Anaheim just doesn't, Gibson's numbers would be excellent. I would be very surprised if Gibson was in in any of those cities, even in Tampa. If he was in Vasilevsky's position, I think Gibson would have at least a .920 save percentage. I think that it's been tough for him, and the fact that he signed till 2027 means he's probably there for a while to come. And so I think that with Gibson, I think there's some reputation points he gets with people, and I think we know how much rubber he's facing in Anaheim, so it might blind us to some of the numbers that aren't exactly flattering when it comes to Gibson. So I do understand why people like John Gibson and vote for him when they're asked who the best goaltenders in the league are. I also understand people saying, hey, wait a minute, look at the stats. The stats would tell you that's incorrect. But I've mentioned this with goaltending before. Sometimes the stats can be a bit deceptive, especially when you've got a very good goaltender on a really, really bad defensive team. Tugnut's always the example I use. I'll throw it out there again because his numbers were terrible. Then when he would get to a team that played good defense, suddenly his numbers were fantastic. And I get the feeling with Gibson, it's kind of that situation where if he was playing for a contending team, his numbers would be great. Then you got Matt Murray, 27 years of age, $6.25 million contract until next year, 2024. So Toronto takes on the contract from Ottawa. There was a lot of guffaws about them taking on the contract. What's bailed them out is not picking up Murray, it's picking up Samsonov, and picking up Samsonov on a very team-friendly contract, which they had to sign him to because the money for Murray is high. Matt Murray's $6.25 million, a lot of that is based on the 2 Stanley Cup rings. Those 2 Stanley Cup rings means he's earned good money. And we can debate about how much money that should have been, for how long. Was it a smart move for Ottawa to pick him up? And all those debates and all of that. I think Murray's played well enough. I don't think he'll ever justify the $6.25 million cap hit, but I hope I'm wrong. I would like to see next season a really strong year from Matt Murray. I like the goaltender. Connor Hellebuyck, 28 years of age, $6.17 million contract. And hey, that cap hit's going to go up, isn't it? And it's going to go up in 2024. There's one more year for Winnipeg before Hellebuyck could command Bobrovsky money. And this is where it gets interesting too. If you're sitting down with Hellebuyck, how do you argue with him? Hey, I know what Bobrovsky and Price make, but you're not getting that money because. Are you arguing that he's not worth that money? Are you arguing that goaltenders shouldn't get that amount of money because it throws off the team's cap situation? Or are you going to sell him on the idea of, hey, we want to win a cup here in Winnipeg. In order to do that, we need to have fiscal responsibility. And you'd have to get other players to buy into that as well. Hellebuck can demand a lot of money. And I would argue with the amount of times that Hellebuck shows up on this board, he's earned it. He's earned it. 2018, he's second on the board. 2020, he wins it. 2021, he's fourth on the board. I think he's earned the right. And this year, he's going to be top 5. I think that Hellebuck, if Hellebuck won the Vezina, I wouldn't be upset at all. And I say that despite being a Boston fan and wearing this and talking about Ullmark probably being the best best goaltender in the NHL this season right now. But, I mean, Hellebuck's numbers have been really, really good as well. Then you've got Binnington, 27 years of age, $6 million contract till 2027. And he, of course, another divisive figure in the hockey world. And his numbers have not been great. But St. Louis fans will say, hey, it's backdoor goals, it's bad defense, it's not Binnington. Binnington's quite good. So, again, you have that debate. And I can understand where people are coming from with Binnington and why his numbers are down. My argument has been, I'm not saying Binnington's bad. I'm saying that Binnington hasn't necessarily bailed himself out either. If you look at the expected goals, the advanced stats on Binnington, they're middle of the pack. He's very middle of the pack. Mediocre in some areas, middle of the pack in others. But in general, again, he's playing behind a team that's playing bad defensively. That will negatively impact his numbers. Grubauer, 29 years of age, $5.9 million contract till 2027. He was a top 3 in the Vezina voting. I understand why Francis signed him, but it was definitely too long, and it was a high cap hit. It was a cap hit that he signed to that clearly Joe Sakic looked at and said, I'm not matching that, I can't match that. And it was a smart move by Sakic. If you look at the Avalanche this year, they've got Francouz and Georgiev. Georgiev's on a very team-friendly deal with Colorado. I don't have him on the board here, but his numbers have actually been quite good. And it shows that when Colorado decided, hey, Grubauer was a great guy for us last year, but we're not spending that much, it was a smart move. And again, with goaltenders, that can be, it can definitely be a gamble because of how unpredictable things are. So then you've got Quick, 35 years of age, $5.8 million cap hit for this year. And he's done at the end of this year on this contract. We'll see whether or not LA brings him back for another year or two, what kind of contract he signs. I don't get the feeling he's ready to leave just yet out of the National Hockey League, but I do wonder if he might be ready to move on from LA at the end of this year and just move on. Like, for instance, just fantasy booking this in the event that Brian Elliott says, I'm done with Tampa. Maybe they turn around and they say, hey, so Jonathan Quick, you want to be the backup for a year for Andrei Vasilevskiy, and maybe we can win you another Stanley Cup ring. Would Quick turn that down? And I'm just throwing that out there. And then he would sign for probably a cheapy deal on Tampa Bay's side of things, and people would be very angry. Tampa Bay rigging it again. So Shesterkin, 25 years of age, $5.67 million contract. Though he's not having the same year he did last year, we know that's a bargain, right? And he's signed till 2025. Oh, 2025. So that we're in 2023. But putting this board together, I realized 2025 could be quite the year for goaltenders. Let's go through this. You got Saros, 26 years of age, $5 million contract till 2025. Ullmark, 27 years of age, $5 million cap hit till 2025. Demko, 25 years of age, $5 million cap hit till 2025. Robin Lehner, who of course is missing this year, 29 years of age, $5 million cap hit, 2025 is the expiry. So you've got Shesterkin, Saros, Ullmark, Demko, Lehner, all potentially free agents in 2025. At the very least, bidding each other up. So whichever goaltender signs first, the other goaltenders would probably use that as a template and say, we are worth this much. What's interesting, too, is you have Shesterkin, your Vezina winner last year, right? Saros, who was top 3 in Vezina last year. You have Ullmark, who may very well win the Vezina this year, right? You've got Demko, who's had a really rough year, but was almost top 5 last year in the Vezina voting. And he still has a ton of potential. He may not realize that in Vancouver. He may end up moving on. But Demko at $5 million, it probably goes up the next contract. And then again, with Lehner, we'll see what he's like when he comes back from injury and how that turns out. Then you got Varlamov, 33 years of age, $5 million cap hit. He's a free agent this summer. And again, I'll be interested to see what kind of money he gets. Does he stay with the Islanders? Do they get him to take a little bit less money? We'll see. But it is interesting that the highest paid goaltenders aren't necessarily the best goaltenders. And when you look at forwards and skaters, there's some of that too, but it feels like with goaltenders, it's way more random and way more hard to predict than it is with defense, with forwards, and with skaters in general. You get a more predictable result there. Save percentage leaders this season, Ullmark 937, Gustafsson in Minnesota 926. Yeah, he's pretty darn good. And Ottinger also with a 926. So the goaltending's been pretty good for Dallas, for Boston. And again, with Minnesota, give Gustafsson the net. I keep saying it. I keep saying it. Wins leaders, Ullmark with 26, Vasilevskiy and Hellebuyck both with 25. I would not be surprised to see Ullmark, Hellebuyck, Vasilevskiy as the top three for the Vezina at the end of the year. That would not surprise me in the slightest. Would it surprise me if Shesterkin gets in there too? No. Shesterkin absolutely could end up in that top three. Quality starts. So these are the percentage of starts by a goaltender where they have a save percentage of 900 or higher. Ullmark, way ahead of everybody else at 84.4%. Ullmark goes in the net. It's going to take a lot of shots to beat him. He is not easy to beat. Gustafsson, 76.2%. Again, Minnesota, he's earned it. Hellebuyck, 75.6% of the time he gives a quality start to the Winnipeg Jets. So that three right there tells you Gustafsson probably a little bit underrated and definitely a bargain when you look at his contract. Ottinger, 69.2% for him. Sorokin, 68.4%. I know, I'm surprised it's not a little bit higher too. Samsonov, 68% in Toronto. And Talbot, 68% in Ottawa. And if you're a little bit surprised about Talbot, me too. But that's the thing. That's how unpredictable this is. And from one year to the next, you just never know. Like with Quick, for instance, this year quality starts, 33%. And yet, if the playoffs started tomorrow and Jonathan Quick's the starter for LA, would any of us be surprised if he pitched a shutout the first night? Nope. Because Jonathan Quick in the playoffs can be a whole other beast. And that's the even more interesting part is, when you're figuring how much you're paying your goaltender and how much he's worth, how much does their playoff resume matter? And a playoff goaltending record can be unpredictable too. As great as guys that I've watched like Hasek, Roy, Brodeur, and others have been, and Luongo, they've all had great playoffs and they've all had lousy playoffs. And sometimes they've had lousy playoff games right after great playoff games and vice versa. Which maybe it gets a little more pronounced with goaltenders than with forwards and with defensemen because we pay more attention to the goaltender. He's the last line of defense. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts. And I guess what it comes down to is the best goalie in the league is, and that's where the debate is. For me, I would still go with Vasilevskiy. Last year, Shesterkin had a year for the ages, absolutely. But if I had a Game 7 situation and I need a win and I can have any goalie in the National Hockey League currently for that Game 7, I'm going with Andrei Vasilevskiy. That's my honest opinion, and I say that even with the season Ullmark's having. In a Game 7 situation, I'd be going with Vasi. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.